Hi, my name is Elisa Lamel, and today I will be persuading my audience to end the war on drugs and to legalize all drugs. I think that my audience would be interested in this topic because, as a taxpayer of Brown County and the United States, you are paying for these individuals who are incarcerated and living in our overcrowded prisons. And instead of having this money put towards better use that would benefit our society, it is being put towards war on drug efforts that is a failed system and hasn't really been working for many years. The audience may be aware of this topic as current drug prohibition efforts are commonly in the news. However, they may not be aware of the financial impact that this is having on our U.S. economy as well as locally as on our local Brown County economy. The audience should listen to me because I've done extensive research in this topic, and I am a member of the Brown County Society as well. So I can relate and respond to my audience because I feel the impacts of this as well as in a small area, many of us have been involved or have seen drug violence or know somebody who is addicted to drugs and sees how even a small possession of marijuana can greatly change the success of a person's life. My audience may hold very strong attitudes about this topic. Some may be in opposition of my position. Others may partially agree with my position and agree we should legalize more harmless drugs such as marijuana rather than cocaine, but they agree with the partial legalization of drugs. So I would like to begin with having my audience imagine that you are a member of the 1920s. And President Woodrow Wilson has just enacted the 18th Amendment prohibiting all alcoholic substances and intoxicating beverages. And you think that this is going to be great, it's going to end criminal activity, and it's going to get all the drunks out of the bars, and it's going to make them more valuable members of society. And instead, your vision goes much different. Instead, organized crime increases, increased violence occurs, underground gang activities occur, and in fact, the goods are being produced underground without any sort of regulation. And you soon realize that this ban has actually created more violence than when alcohol consumption was legal. As you can see, the Prohibition era from our nation's history has not worked, and our current war on drugs is not working either. It is encouraging increased violence and criminal activity, as was the case with the Prohibition. In fact, this led to historic gang members such as Al Capone, who in fact made $60 million a year from the Prohibition efforts through his bootlegging jobs. And it has also led to increased violence, such as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago in 1929. This effort at prohibition has failed, and so is our current war on drugs. Legalizing drugs would not only save the country millions of dollars in enforcement efforts, but would address the current overcrowding in prisons across the nation, and as well as provide a source of revenue for the country through the taxation of legalized drugs. So first, let's start by seeing just how the war on drugs is impacting our nation. A basic economics 101 lesson will show us that prohibiting a good does not necessarily mean that the market for the good is eliminated. Essentially, it shrinks the market, but allows black markets to emerge, which are even more dangerous than having the drug actually be legalized. This was seen in the Prohibition era, and it is currently seen now. The emergence of black markets and crime increases violence as it leads to buyers and sellers not being able to resolve their disputes in more judicial or legal methods such as a court. They must resort to gun violence because their procedures are illegal to begin with, so they cannot go to a judicial legal system for dispute resolution problems. It generates corruption, especially within small towns and cities. It leads to the corruption of judicial officials, judges, politicians, and very influential members of society. And additionally, it inhibits quality control in the sense that the good is being produced underground by unknown methods and is not being regulated by a government control system, and that what you are purchasing and what you're told you're being purchased may be two very different things and may actually be more harmful to you. As a result, this has led to prison overcrowding. The U.S. has the largest prison population in the world, with over 2.3 million people behind bars. And over half of those people are incarcerated for a drug law violation. So to put this in more perspective, that is 1 in every 111 adults who is incarcerated for a drug violation. As my visual aid, I am showing a chart of the incarcerated Americans in the United States prison systems. As you can see on the bottom here, the 1970s is when President Nixon initiated the war on drug efforts. As you can see, incarcerated individuals as a result of drug violations has greatly increased and currently shows no signs of slowing. Furthermore, the U.S. is the #1 nation in the world in illegal drug use, and about 40,000 people were in U.S. jails and prisons in the 1980s. Currently, that number is over 500,000 individuals in the U.S. prison and jail systems. So let's see how much the war on drugs is costing the U.S. economy. So for starters, the efforts to enforce the war on drugs and prevent legalization of all drugs is costing the U.S. economy and government a substantial amount of money. So to put this in perspective, if the drug global trade were a country, it would have one of the top 20 economies in the world. And a recent Cato study predicted that the legalizing of drugs could save the U.S. about $41 billion a year in drug prevention efforts. And as well as a recent Pew study that says that the war on drugs cost the U.S. an average of $30,000 a year annually to incarcerate an inmate. We put this in perspectives. The nation only spends an average of $11,000 a year on a young student's education. $30,000 a year to incarcerate an inmate, and $11,000 a year to support a U.S. student. A 2005 Harvard University study showed that if we just legalize a small portion of all the drugs, let's just legalize marijuana, we could save nearly $8 billion nationwide in drug prevention efforts. And if we tax those drugs and make a revenue on them, we would generate more than $6 billion a year. So let's bring the war on drugs a little closer to home and see how this is affecting individuals in Brown County. So in 2013, the Brown County Drug Task Force made a record 648 drug arrests. Taxpayers across the country are estimated at paying $41 billion every year to get drugs off the streets and drug dealers behind bars. In Brown County, the Brown County Sheriff's Department estimates that they have spent more than $2 million in drug prevention and enforcement efforts. So in conclusion, I believe that the war on drugs should be ended and that all drugs should be legalized. The prohibition and criminalization of drugs has only led to increased violence and organized crime and put a strain on our country's budget, law enforcement, and prison systems, not only as a nation, but locally as well. In the U.S., to put this in perspective, if illegal drugs were taxed at rates comparable to those of alcohol and tobacco, which are current unhealthy legal drugs, it would yield a tax revenue of $46.7 billion. I don't know about you, but that's enough that we could greatly reduce our country's deficit. We could stick that money back into diminishing Social Security benefits, as well as disability efforts and veteran efforts, and greatly turn the country around. Those who want to use drugs will use them anyway. As we can see, even with making the drugs illegal, it has not reduced the use of them and has not reduced the individuals who use them. Thank you for listening, and I hope you were persuaded to end the war on drugs and legalize all criminal activity.